So, welcome to Unit 7, entitled Industrialization and Urbanization. The key here is recognizing that at the same time we're discussing Unit 7, Unit 6, the settling of the West, is occurring. So, as we're filling in all of that manifest destiny land, Transcontinental Railroad has crossed America, farmers are moving west, embracing the challenges and the motivations with the Homestead Act and the bad weather. The Native Americans and the buffalo are slowly being pushed aside and wiped out, and farmers are left having difficult times, whether it's pushing for populist ideas like bimetallism and direct election of senators, or just trying to escape the railroads and all of the problems they create. So at the same time that's happening, we're talking about what's going on in the Northeast of the United States: Pittsburgh, New York, Philadelphia, Cleveland, all of these major cities that are having huge population growth, urbanization, and huge industrial growth, the second industrial revolution. So this is mostly from about 1850 to about 1900. Now, soon after Unit 6 and Unit 7, we're going to talk about the progressive era, in which we try and fix some of these mistakes. And after that, we're going to talk about imperialism, when our attention turns outward because we've kind of filled in America. And then Unit 10 will be the effects of imperialism, World War One. So that being said, let's break down our first essential question in Unit 7. We're dealing with: why would anyone be crazy enough to move to the Northeast, to the cities? Now, this should look familiar. You saw this in Unit 6, 6.1. Why would anyone be crazy enough to move to the West? And we're going to have the same idea. We're going to have challenges to doing so and motivations, reasons why they did it anyway. Here's a quick look at vocabulary. You could push pause and get this into your notes, and then moving on to the challenges. So one of the challenges were living conditions. They were deplorable. They were awful. Because the cities grew so fast, and we're talking rapid urbanization. Most of the buildings that were built were either put up hastily, shoddily, unsafely, or they just shoved people into overcrowded places. You can see in this dumbbell tenement, shaped like a dumbbell, that you've got one bathroom in the middle for these four families, one fire escape on the edges, and many times the fire escapes were not built well. And you can look inside and see all of the issues between overcrowdedness and fire hazards, etc. Anytime you put lots of people in small areas, you're going to deal with sanitation issues, you're going to deal with crime, etc. And so just where they lived was tough. You know, the Polish word for neighborhood is our word that we hear, ghetto. Well, a Polish neighborhood was no worse than any other neighborhood originally, but because the conditions were so bad, when people said, "Where do you live?" and the Polish person said, "I lived in the ghetto," it comes to mean a negative term. Now, to maybe understand this best of all, you can see Mr. Lamont's favorite U.S. history picture. And there it is. My favorite picture from U.S. history. I don't know about you, but the first thing I see when I look at this picture is a dead horse in the middle of the street. The next thing I notice is that these kids are paying no attention to the dead horse in the middle of the street, which blows my mind. If I was a 7-year-old kid and there was a dead squirrel in my street, I'd be poking a stick at it for an hour. What does that tell you about these kids? It tells you that they're used to seeing dead horses in the street, which tells you that the living conditions in these cities was terrible. It was awful. They went through something called culture shock. Now, culture shock is basically when you get off a boat from Italy or Ireland or China or Russia or Greece, and you walk into America with its many sights, sounds, colors, customs that are so very different than what you're used to. There were two types of reactions. One was called tossed salad. In the tossed salad, you maintain your identity. You go live in Little Italy or you go live in Chinatown, and you try and stay like you are. In the melting pot, your culture and ethnicity kind of blends in with America, and your cultural ideas and exchanges and foods and clothing kind of becomes American, but America kind of becomes you. And they both happen. And they both happen in large numbers. Probably the best example of culture shock is what happened when many of these immigrants actually landed in America. In the Northeast, most of them had to go through New York. If you went through New York, you went through Ellis Island, right there in New York Harbor, right under the shadow of Lady Liberty. If you're on the West Coast, most Chinese went through what was called Angel Island. Regardless, it was a humiliating, fearful, intimidating experience. You would go through a full body physical. If you failed the physical, chances are you could be put back on a boat and sent home. And keep in mind, most people immigrating to the United States had spent every dollar they had to buy the ticket. They'd sold everything, bought the one-way ticket, and had come hoping upon hope that America would work for them. Just look up Ellis Island and take some time to see some pictures and hear some stories about the immigrant experience here. It was very interesting. Like pink eye. If you had pink eye, there's a good chance you would be marked with some chalk on your clothes, and they would put you back on the boat and ship you back where you came from for pink eye. Okay, families would be broken up. It was a very traumatizing experience. It was culture shock. One reaction to all of this culture shock and huge amount of immigration was called nativism. Basically, large numbers of Americans who were already here decided that all these quote unquote new immigrants, most new immigrants were from Southeastern Europe, Greece, Italy, Slavic countries, Russia. Many of them were Catholic, many of them were Jewish, and they were seen as bad, not good. You can see Lady Liberty kind of lifting up her skirt as these people are being dumped onto her island. You can see Uncle Sam holding his nose as what looks like a Jewish immigrant arrives at our borders. And maybe best of all, you see down on the bottom here, all of these old immigrants. You can tell by their shadows that their forefathers immigrated to America from Ireland, from England, from Germany, from France, the so-called good immigrants. And what are they saying? Nativism. We don't want any new immigrants. You know, it's hypocrisy. It's look at us. We've grown rich and fat off the American dream, but we don't want to give you the same opportunity. The first real example of nativism was the Chinese Exclusion Act in the 1880s, in which Uncle Sam literally drew up quotas to say how many Chinese we would allow into America. The living conditions were bad, the working conditions were worse. You're talking about incredibly long hours, 10, 12, 14-hour days, 6-day work weeks, some days 7-day work weeks. There was a sign in one shop that said, if you don't come in on Sunday, don't bother coming back on Monday. They were unsafe. There was no safety health regulations. You can see here maybe the best example of how bad working conditions were. If you don't care about kids getting hurt standing on moving machines or working in coal mines when you've got a stick to beat them, to wake them up, or daycare, childcare, when you just go stand next to mom while she snapped beans. You know, if the conditions are bad for the kids, how bad are they for the adults? They were terrible. It was bad. The problem was there was such a high demand for work because there were so many immigrants. You can see here, looking at the numbers, focus on the red or look at the picture to see how full the boat is. People were coming to America by the thousands. In the late 1880s to the early 1900s, you know, American population was rocketing skyward with all these new immigrants. And so many of these immigrants looking for a job would just go into a factory and they would actually have a room where they would sit. And if you don't like the conditions, or if you got hurt, or if you messed up, they just fire you and pull somebody out of the room. So because there was such a high population of workers had almost zero rights. Probably the best example of this is what happened in New York at the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory Fire. You can Google this and you can see a short CBS News expose, but basically a large group of immigrant girls working in a factory in New York, 10th floor of a building, the room caught fire. Well, the fire escapes broke because they weren't work done hastily or correctly enough. The elevator didn't hold them enough. One of the fire escape doors had been locked because they'd been taking too many breaks. And so many of these girls leapt out of a 10, 11-story building to their death in front of thousands of onlookers. It was shocking, but it was a great example of how bad things were for immigrants. It started to create change, which again will lead to Unit 8, which we'll talk about later. Another way to look at working conditions, look at these workers on these skyscrapers high above the New York skyline. I mean, one sneeze, one stumble, and they're falling thousands of feet. Or these coal miners, not just in these tight, cramped spaces, but breathing in coal dust, which is going to corrupt and kill their lungs. So if the conditions were so bad and everything was so terrible to live in, why did people come? Well, in this moment, we want to talk about push-pull factors. Push-pull. Push factors is why do you leave where you are? What kicks you out of your place? Pull factors is why come to America? Why not go to England? Why not to go to Nigeria? Why not go to Brazil? So, push factors. Economic poverty, crushing poverty. Places like Ireland, many places in Southeast Europe were incredibly poor, dealing with poverty that even in the worst conditions in America, it wasn't as bad as it was there. We had that one study that talked about in that Irish county of 10,000 residents, there was one bed. That's how poor this area was. You might also talk about religious persecution, especially Catholics and Jews, in and around different areas in Europe. In this picture down here at the bottom, these are Russian soldiers who have just executed a large number of Jews. These were called pogroms. This was, 50 years before the Holocaust. And many Jews came to America for this reason. You can see this is a leaflet where the Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society, these are Jews who have arrived in America and have collected enough money to reach out to help other Jews come where it'll be safe. So they're being pushed out for religious reasons. And finally, political persecution. The advent of socialism, the rise of this new idea that government should exist to protect the workers, aid the workers, help the workers, was pretty radical. And many of these radicals were being pushed out of their European countries by the governments, mostly emperors and kings. And a lot of them came to America for political freedom. So pushed out for economic, religious, and political reasons, pulled to America mostly for opportunity. You've got the Homestead Act giving land, you've got gold and silver mines, you've got jobs and factories. People came to America for the chance to start over. Just like Fievel said, there's no cats in America and the streets are paved with cheese. However, they also came because there's political freedom. You're not going to get pushed around that much for your political beliefs. And for religious freedom, you're not going to get pushed around that much for your religious beliefs. And so America became seen as, Lady Liberty, the land of the free, the home of the brave. You had opportunity here. Opportunity in a different religion, opportunity with a different political idea, most notably economic opportunity. And that wraps up why anyone would be crazy enough to move to the Northeast in the second half of the 19th century.